sorry. I completely forgot that I'm here for an assignment. I'm not here for pleasure.
Well, we hope it's been pleasurable too.
It has. I've enjoyed myself. Okay, so this story, just a little bit of a preface. It's about 6 pages long, so I think I'll hit right around the 7-minute mark.
Okay.
It's the first part of a short story I'm writing for fiction writing at USU. It's not quite done yet, so I'm only reading the first chunk, which is good because it'll hit the 7-minute mark anyway. I think I should just get reading because it'll be hard to explain it. Okay, so maybe that would be easier if, just a second. Yeah, that's way better. Okay, here I go. Cold, biting steel sank deep into hot, fevered flesh. Boiling red liquid poured from the wound, and blistering pain racked my body, branching and twisting from the metal root. The iron smell saturated the air beneath my nose. My eyes blurred as the pain reached my face and toes simultaneously, and my body slumped, surrendering to the soggy, icy ground. That was the last memory I had as a human, my suicide. Everything before that was a blank, misty fog. As hard as I tried to recall even a scrap of a memory, a fading light, a loving touch, my mind would not allow it. My death was the last thing I can recall before I faced my superiors for the first time. A blank room under blinding white light that came from all the walls at once. The floor and the ceiling too. It held only a long desk, which in turn held a stack of books, quills, and 5 empty, forlorn figures. The figures handed me a book and a quill. They told me that taking my life had been a mistake, and that to atone for my mistake, I was to spend the rest of eternity ferrying souls to the afterlife. That was my punishment, they told me. From context, I learned about myself again over many years. I had died sometime during the Siege of the Black Death. I could see my ghostly apparition in very calm ponds, and later in mirrors and window glass. No one else could, at least not until they were marked with death. My book, given to me by my superiors, would list a name when I opened it, a name and a location. It was my duty to journey there. Upon arriving, all I would have to do was wait. Death would come. The vision of a soul leaving its body was a curse only for our eyes. Us, who had many names, had become fond of the grim. As the soul left its human husk, we were to comfort it, reassure it, and mark its name off our books. By the time we looked up from the pages, a soul had ascended. Then, when we looked back down at our books, there was a new name and a new location. Our journey, unending, began anew. It was the way of the grim. Many centuries had passed since I first began. How many exactly, I couldn't be sure. I had only discovered, or perhaps rediscovered, time about 3 decades ago. It was strangely fulfilling to count the days, nostalgic almost. The day was hot and the sky was clear. My feet left no prints on the dirt path I traveled. My toes kicked up no dust. I knew I could float, but floating had always felt eerie. In these past centuries, I had continued walking like a human. There was no point, and yet I continued. The wind was warm and pleasant, brushing past my skin and ruffling my cloak as I walked. The trees, lined up in arrow-like rows on either side of the path, shifted and glittered as the breeze danced through the branches. Blah, blah, blah. I glanced down at the book in my hand, letting the worn covers fall open as I reminded myself of the name, Mortimer DuPont. The location written below was written in a language not spoken by humans, but I knew the human translation anyway. Paris, France. I had been to this place many times and many different times. The vines I walked along belonged to the city. The further I walked, the fewer and farther in between the vines would become. They would be swallowed by farmland, and then the farmland by cottages. Cottages would become buildings, buildings would become labyrinths. And I would walk along those labyrinths, drawn by the stench of death. It was a bitter way to live, and it would have drawn any human mad. Perhaps then it was good that I was not human. My feet dragged to a halt in front of a particular section of building. I lost myself in my thoughts, and while my body had continued the grind. The familiar burning throb echoed deep in my chest, almost mimicking cruelly a heartbeat. I was close. The wooden sign hanging off the towering brick wall read "Cafe." As I pushed upon the shining red door, a smell suddenly hit me. It was rich and buttery and smelled of roasting meat and delicate spices. The interior of the place was dark, even in the height of day, with the glow of a candle seeping down from the top of a set of stairs near the back. I gingerly waded through the coarse wooden tables and chairs before I came to a stop in front of the wooden counter. Sitting, unattended, was a large pot of stew, the source of the smell. Next to the bubbling pot sat a book that read Recettes. I could feel my throat tighten in phantom hunger, and I pushed on up the stairs. There was no point in attempting to sate my humanly urges. As I came into the room, I found an old, portly man lying on his deathbed, surrounded by what must have been his family. Men and women of all ages crying and worrying over his health. They must have sensed what I knew to be the truth. The man was dying, and quickly. The old man's eyes rolled in my direction, and a look of confusion crossed his face. A small smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. It always amused me, their reactions. A tall, gaunt, spindly man wearing naught but tattered pants, a blood-stained peasant's tunic, and a cloak, carrying a worn book. I must have looked out of place to most, if not all, of my charges. He opened his mouth to speak, but all that erupted was a painful-sounding rasp, his last breath. I watched as his body went limp and his family surged forward in a panic. Surrounded by the people he loved dearly, his soul peeled away from his flesh. A shifting, airy form, loosely shaped as his old body, sat up and looked at a moment at his hands, before looking at me again. "It's my time, isn't it?" he asked, his voice calm. His tone shocked me a little bit. Most souls grieved their old lives or panicked about what lied ahead. I nodded a little bit, opening my own mouth to speak. My voice was caked with dust and always hissed like rust against rust. "Yes, it's your time," I said, starting to reach for my book. "There's no food where I'm going, is there?" His question surprised me. No one had ever, not once, worried about food upon finding they were heading into the afterlife. That was twice this man had shocked me. "I wouldn't know," I said after a moment. "I've never been there." "Then may I have a moment before I go?" he asked, struggling to find his feet. His soul waded through his huddled family, passing through their bodies as he approached me. His eyes were forlorn, as if he were already missing something. "I suppose?" I nodded, watching him closely. This was a new experience for me, watching the soul of this old man waddle uncertainly through the air, down the stairs. I didn't get new experiences very often. I decided to savor it. His soul stopped in front of the pot I had passed earlier. My stomach, against my will, yowled at the scent, and the old man turned with an amused twinkle in his eye. "Do you want some?" I didn't know how to respond. Well, that was a lie. I did know how to respond, with a firm no. But the tugging in my throat, the turning of my stomach, inclined otherwise. I did want some. I wanted to try some. And this day had already passed the point of no return. Nothing could be stranger than this, nothing in the next several centuries. I nodded, and his hands reached for the ladle. I watched as they passed through, unable to grasp onto material things, and the twinkle burned from his eye. Before I could stop myself, I felt my hands reaching in his place. The warm, smooth metal brushed up against his fingers, and the edges pressed into my skin as I picked up the ladle. The ladle. My breath caught in my chest. I had imagined my hands would pass through as well, unable to touch anything. I suppose I had never tried. I hesitantly picked up the ladle, bringing it to my lips. The smell was strong now, salt and meat and savory herbs. I could feel the phantom rush of blood to my cheeks and ears. This was the most exciting thing I had done in hundreds of years. My lips pressed against the hot, dripping ladle, nearly scalding themselves, and let the broth flow over my tongue. I nearly dropped the ladle as the taste overwhelmed me. Me, who had not had a single thing to eat or drink in almost half a millennium. Tears butted in my eyes, and my limbs shook gently, the lilting taste of lamb, scented with wild herbs and butter. Quickly, I downed the rest of the ladle, chewing and swallowing gratefully. Mortimer chuckled at my reaction and nodded. "You like it?" he asked, a proud smile on his face. I nodded gently, staring longingly at the empty ladle. "Have some more," he motions, and I dipped the ladle back in the pot. I downed three more ladlefuls of stew before setting the metal utensil back down for good. Mortimer looked extremely pleased as he watched. I'm sure he would have an interesting story to tell in the afterlife. "I'm glad you enjoyed that," he said gently. "I'm ready to go now." I wiped the remaining stew off my lip and pulled out my book and quill from my cloak pocket. My eyes lingered on the old man's soul for 1 second longer, unwilling to look away before casting down at his name. With one quick swipe, I crossed off his name. My hand froze at the end of the line, my arm and body quickly following suit. I knew that when I looked up, he would be gone, but part of me wanted to pretend, to to keep living in this strange, wonderful moment. I looked up to an empty cafe.
Yeah, if I die and Mortimer and my mom are there with like mac and cheese. It'll be heaven. So that's our night, guys. As long as if no one else wants to come up and read. Otherwise, we won't have a second Helicon this month because of Thanksgiving. We will have one. The next one will be December 7th, and that'll be the last one for the season. So yeah, there we are.
Thank you, Nathan.